All right, thank you for staying. And if you're just joining, you're watching Daybreak, reaching you live from the nation's capital in Abuja. Now, ahead of Russia, Ukraine, well, I would say Russia's invasion of Ukraine last week, Thursday, more than a dozen European and Asian countries were urging their citizens to leave Ukraine. The United States, Canada, Germany, Australia, and other countries have evacuated members of their diplomatic staff and their families. But even after the invasion, no African country has announced concrete plans for the evacuation of its citizens. Now, until the federal government announced that it has made necessary arrangements to evacuate to safety stranded Nigerians in Ukraine who have been caught up by the Russia-Ukraine war through listed 4 borders between Poland and Ukraine, thousands of Nigerians are currently stranded in Ukraine, desperate to flee the country. Now, we will be taking a look at the efforts, of the government, and what is actually happening in Russia and Ukraine. We have in the studio former United Nations expert on mission, Wing Commander Musa Salmanu, retired, and he'll be talking to us about this. Thank you and welcome to Daybreak this morning.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me in the studios today.
Well, for the past week, a lot of discussions have been ongoing. I mean, the global media space has been taken over by this Russia-Ukraine invasion, rightfully so, because a lot is at stake here. This is something that looks more like a third world war in the making, if you look at the country, Russia and Ukraine, and then the allies that are on the side of Ukraine now, the entire Western countries and all of that. That's a huge issue, isn't it? Now, we are not seeing, engagement by African leaders. Yes, we've seen statement by the African Union, but where is Africa in all of this?
Well, thank you so much. If I simply put, Africa is where it has always been, a footnote in everything. That's to say like an afterthought, if I put it that way. And that is where Africa is at the moment. There are, of course, as you said, some press releases or some ECOWAS has also made statements, AU and so on and so forth. But of what impact are those statements? You will say perhaps they're not punchy enough. In diplomacy or international relations, it's not really how much noise you make, but it's your capacity for capability. And now, do you have the capacity to do what you say you want to do, or to, project your interest within the Committee of Nations? If you're found wanting in terms of that, nobody pays attention to what you say. So African countries, of course, it has shown once again that we have a lot of stepping up to do. We have a lot of leveraging that we ought to do with what we have, to look at what we have and see how are we leveraging on situations like this, and how can we make our views heard and
in the wake of a
our
devastating
views to matter in a way. But for now, honestly, it's just a footnote.
When you say footnote, being at the footnote is not a great reputation, is it?
Unfortunately not, and I'm not saying it being proud of it as an African. I wish that we are the ones, because in terms of size, in terms of if you combine Africa, we are 53 or more countries. And so even if you look at the issue of multilateralism, that's the United Nations, if you have such a block, that means we are able to say something. But if you look at it again in terms of numbers and strength and veto, we have 50-some, more than 53 countries. Yet our decision in the real terms, or our votes in real time, is not up to one of those, the P5. So you see, that means with that, we're already limited in our expression, what we can do. Then when you look at, in terms of the economy and military and so on, we're dependent on others to a large extent. And those are the indices that determine how punchy or how weighty your punch is. And if it's weighty enough, then it can mean something. If it's not, then you really, unfortunately, have to remain in that footnote.
Yeah, but again, if you look at our diplomatic missions in some of these countries, now we are faced with a reality in Ukraine, how a lot of Africans are now stranded, including Nigerians, in thousands. The last time we checked, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is telling us that we have about more than 5,500 students alone, just students, and then not to even talk about other non-students who are in Ukraine. Now, leaving the country is a huge challenge for them. Yes, we've heard that, yes, countries like Romania, Bulgaria are opening their doors to, some Africans, including Nigerians, to be able to go there, without the necessary documentation and the likes, given the kind of situation that we have, at hand. But leaving still becomes a problem. With the kind of chaos that we are seeing, along the borders between Ukraine and Poland. We saw some videos that went viral, showing some kind of discrimination, rather, a kind of an operation that looks like it's Ukrainian first before any other one. But we all have blood running in our veins, isn't it?
Well, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality about international politics or even national interest. It's you first. Self-preservation. That's the first law of nature. So when things happen, people look out for their own. I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do, because there are certain basic steps that has to be taken, like in terms of there is the issue of human rights. Everybody should be treated with dignity and so on. But when you come to reality, people will look out for their own first. And that is what is happening out there in Ukraine. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. And thankfully, things are improving, because when those videos went viral, I think there was this, it was more of a name and shame. And people felt, oh, there had been some improvements. And on both sides, that's both on the sides of the European nations or Eastern European nations there. And even on our side of our own government, there was a lot of engagement that ensured that those passages were open across those borders. But it shows that nations, when push comes to shove, nations will defend their own interests first before anyone else. And we have to accept that. And we have to come to the reality of that. And so we should start asking questions that what is our own national interest? How do we defend it at all points in time, and how do we push that national interest?
Well, in
first?
terms of nations looking out for their own interest in the first place, this, trade of words between Russia and Ukraine and the US and the likes, it didn't just happen haphazardly. There've been weeks, months of back and forth, throwing of words and here and there, and United States has been warning that there's likely to be an invasion. So it didn't catch anyone by surprise. But here we are, it looks like we are just, surprised. It doesn't look like there was some kind of proactive, steps to make sure that the safety of Nigerians is guaranteed in the event of a situation like this.
Yes, there were adversaries, to be fair to the government. There were some advisories. Okay, the situation is escalating, and so on and so forth. But typical of humans, sometimes also you find out that except something happens, people are not likely to respond to that. I give you an example. In places where there's hurricane and so on, there will be hurricane warnings, there will be flood warnings and so on. People should evacuate, but people don't always, until people are almost by force pulled out of those areas. So when you come back to this, you find out that there were the signs that this is likely going to happen. Russia is very, very likely, because if you look at history, if you look at, say, 2016, I think, when Russia invaded invaded Georgia, this was almost leading, everybody knew that likely this is what is going to likely happen. But then, remember you said about 5,000 students. The schools did not close. They did not say, okay, we are no longer taking lessons and so on, and therefore students can go out and so on, or start living and so on. So for students, there's always the thought that, okay, if I leave and nothing happens, I will have lost maybe a term, and so on, and I will not be able to come back. So there were no those guarantees. Will I go back to school? Will I be able to continue where I left and so on, if it doesn't happen? But then, unfortunately, it happened. And that comes to where the issue of getting ready. Are we prepared as a country?
There's a video we're going to watch really soon. But before we do that, from the whole situation happening presently in Ukraine, it seems like for Nigeria, we don't have, a structure, for our diplomatic missions to strengthen our foreign policy. Is that the situation here? So,
and I will have to make it clear that I'm not a foreign affairs expert in this regards, but what I will say is that there are a combination of factors that determine how well you can protect your citizens out there. That's why we have diplomatic missions to interface between the citizens and governments of those nations, and so on. So you find out, or you ask your question from personal experiences, how well do our diplomatic missions fare out there? How many or how well do they? I mean, to be fair, also there's a lot of improvement, but we're not yet there. And where the diplomats sent out there take it upon themselves to go the whole breadth or the whole length to ensure that Nigerians are properly and adequately protected. Now, in situations like this where you have evacuation, non-combat evacuations, whereby you want to go and take your nationals from somewhere, Nigeria has done that in the past. Now, what the questions we'll ask is that, do we still have that, or do we still maintain that capability to be able to ensure that our Air Force, or using any other power, which could be national power here includes even private airlines, to go and evacuate Nigerians. We've seen that happen in places. What perhaps we might have to do is to ensure that we have that capability every day or on standby at every point in time, so that they will be able to go into those countries. Because, look, it's not as easy as we would want if you are evacuating.
Because, a lot of people talks about the issue of, we've heard about aviation sector, this hike in the price of aviation fuel. We've also, are talking about thousands of Nigerians who are there, and some are making the case that Russia is just Ukraine is just so far away from Nigeria. So, wondering how that movement is going to be. Looking at also the security situation around that side, even though they will be moving to neighboring countries. But again, moving, that large number of students, some feel that it might be kind of chaotic.
Yeah, it's always difficult. We just saw what happened in Afghanistan. U.S. has the capacity and capability to conduct heavy airlift, but we saw what happened in Afghanistan. So in a way, even though the United States is doing, the Congress are doing a lot of investigations to find out what actually went wrong, were there no intelligence, what went wrong with the plan. But in our own case, so it's a lot of logistics that is involved. It's a lot of coordination with other countries, because there's the issue of overflight. There's issue of, let's take example, if you're sending in your military to evacuate those nationals, the first question you ask is, does the Air Force in this instance have the capacity to do that? How fast can it do it? Then secondly, if it does, have you gone into some kind of agreement with countries for overflight? You pass through their airspace with your military military plane. It's a different thing if you're going with a normal Nigerian registered commercial airplane. And so on and so on. So there are a lot of issues involved.
And we are hearing, you know, more than 20 countries are shutting down their airspace for Russia. Now, you could, you know, you could see that those countries are, you know, within that region, you know, and all of that. So how safe is it, really? I hope, are we like, I hope we will not see a situation where, you know, an aircraft carrying Nigerians will be shut down, you know, because maybe there's some kind of, you know.
So if this evacuation is taking place from a third country, not in Ukraine, as we have, because the Ukrainian airspace is risky now, very risky, to fly over or to operate within. So there, if you're taking the Nigerians from, say, Poland or from Romania or from wherever, where any of those countries that there's less risk because we'll plot a route that gets there. Then, secondly, I read in the news the United States has made it clear that it's not going to impose a no-fly zone because that would literally mean some kind of declaration of war and so on. So yes, it will. And when you talk about the Russian airspace or Russian registered airlines have been banned from so many European airspace, Russia has retaliated with also banning a lot of European registered airlines in its airspace. So what happens is that when we are going for such evacuation, we're not a party to that conflict. We're just going to airlift our citizens. So, and that's why there must be a lot of coordination and assurances and agreements with countries around. For example, if we have agreed with Poland that we can, I mean, they are receiving our citizens there, so we can now agree to send our planes there and evacuate these people, our citizens, back home.
That sounds much easier.
Yeah, it's easy with a lot of coordination in the background, with a lot of diplomacy, which I'm sure Nigeria is capable of doing. Nigeria has been doing that a lot. And as you have seen, situation has started to improve with our diplomatic missions in those countries. It shows you something that something is being done. Just yesterday, the Minister of Foreign Affairs met with the National Assembly to map out modalities to do that. Perhaps what you would have said, or what, going by your question, is that should have been done earlier. You see, this is a fast unraveling event. No matter how you plan, and we should have planned more than this, you find out that in the implementation, there are things that will not go the way you wanted them to go. All right. And so you have to make adjustments from point A to point B. But yes, so far we hear, as of yesterday, about 400 or so students have crossed to the various countries. So the next stage should be, how do you evacuate them back to Nigeria?
All right, well, we'll talk more, you know, because this is getting more interesting. The issue about, you know, national carrier, could it be that it is, you know, for times like this that Nigeria
is coming
a national carrier, and we don't have any. So the question about how we are going to move our, you know, nationals, you know, from those countries back to Nigeria. Are we using commercial aircraft? Are we using the Air Force aircraft, or which one? We'll talk more about that shortly after this breather. We'll take a look at a protest that went on yesterday at the Russian embassy here in Abuja. Some who are reportedly parents of students in Ukraine, you know, were protesting at the Russian embassy, you know, concerning the safety of their wards. So take a look.
The case, our children that are schooling there are no longer in school. So many of them have run away for their safety. So presently we don't know where they are. We can't account for them. So that is why we are here.
We Nigerian women are come to beg the UK and the Russia and the Nigeria embassy and the UK embassy to join together to make peace. My junior sister is there, so they're crying to Nigeria to beg the Ukraine and Russia to make peace. They still love where they they still love the town. So they need peace to reign.
We have children there that are schooling. We have businessmen there from Nigeria that are there. But because of this war, it gives us sleepless nights. So that is why we are here, to tell Russian government, Ukrainian government to negotiate and shift swords, give peace a chance. So that our children that are out of school now there should return back to school. The businessmen there should go have peace to go about their normal businesses. So that is why we are pleading with them to give peace a chance and stop the war.
All right, there you have it. Some families and parents of those students stranded in Ukraine, Nigerian students stranded in Ukraine, they are protesting and calling for diplomacy and peace to prevail in those axes. Now, we have in the studio Wing Commander Musa Salmanu, retired. He is former United Nations expert on mission, and he's talking to us about the efforts to evacuate Nigerians from neighboring countries to Ukraine back to the country. Now, yes, talking about how we intend to go about this in terms of capacity, maybe you could talk more on that. How do we intend to go about it?
So, the basic question is, do we have the capacity to do that? And I would say yes, we can do it. We can evacuate Nigerians in that number from Nigeria back to Nigeria. So can we go into Ukraine now as it is to evacuate Nigerians from Ukraine? It's a tough one, because then there is already hostilities ongoing in Ukraine. So the list, so what that will mean is that if you're going into Ukraine to evacuate Nigerians, you have to fight your way through to where Nigerians are. That is, that's a tough one, especially that we are not we're not parties to this conflict. So, but however, what it's doing is, if Nigerians are provided safe passage into another country, which is what is happening with Poland and the other countries, we can evacuate Nigerians from there. And we can use all means possible, or all means available to us as a country. We can, from a third country that they are, we could fly in there and repatriate them back home. Or you could use all means, Air Force, commercial flights, chartered flights, and so on and so forth, and bring them back home.
I mean, we have quite a number of private jets in Nigeria, isn't it? Maybe at this time, they could be useful, for us, as a country.
How many private jets will you take there? So you have to also look at the capacity of that aircraft. If you're taking 400 students, mostly students or Nigerians from those countries, you don't want to go with a jet that can carry maybe 12 or 100.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also something. It means something, isn't it? Even if it is one person, that is being airlifted
out of 400.
No. I mean, that counts for something. What I mean is that, we could, of course, we should deploy all the aircraft at our disposal, whether commercial, whether Air Force. But I'm saying that for those who have private jets, maybe it's time to make some donations to say, okay, here is my private jet. Let
we've seen that in the past. The chief executive of, or is it the chairman of Air Peace? It's a private entity. It's a private. It's a commercial entity, but they offered their planes then to evacuate Nigerians, I think, from South Africa. So yes, this is time where spirited Nigerians will have to come and say, what can we do for our country? How can we contribute? How can we help
Right.
to bring fellow Nigerians back home, to provide that succor to Nigerians? Like if now we, apart from air peace, I'm mentioning air peace because it has done in the past and so on.
And it's also going to do, I think the Minister of Foreign Affairs also mentioned air peace and air and max air.
Exactly. So so I'm urging all Nigerians to offer to kind of, this is the time to come in, to step in and say, okay, if the federal government has decided that we're going to evacuate Nigerians from those places, it's time to show support. It's time to be a Nigerian and get involved and say that how do I support this movement? How do I get people out of harm's way back home?
Okay. Now, to do this evacuation, it's going to require some form of funding. And I think right now Nigeria is already grappling with money issues. Do you think it's going to be a problem for us?
No, it wouldn't be. I don't see it as a problem. When you say funding, it's relative. If you have Nigerians out there, they're in harm's way, and there is no amount that is too much to bring them back home. As we earlier said, the Minister of Foreign Affairs was at the National Assembly. I remember they have the powers to appropriate and so on. So if there is any issue of funding, I'm sure the National Assembly is ready to provide all the needed resources to ensure that Nigerians are evacuated from those countries. So I don't foresee funding to be a problem.
Okay, now another likely challenge, is the issue of passports, documentation and all of that. We know that there are a number of Nigerians who are in Ukraine that are not having the necessary documents on all the papers and the passports and the rest of them. Is that a challenge for us, at this material time? Because there's a likelihood of other, African brothers who could just, come. I mean, after all, the color is the same. So a Ghanaian or, even though accent will tell, but there are some African countries that you really can't tell the difference. Ghanaians, for instance, could just say, well, I'm a Nigerian, so join the queue, join the evacuation and all of that. So is that likely to be a challenge? Okay,
well, you see, the issue of is humanity here. So yes, our priority are Nigerians, to get them out of harm's way, get them back home. But however, the humanity in us means that if other countries are stranded and we have the capacity and we can bring them back home, why not? We should do that. So there is nothing wrong if we can have that capacity, that when we're coming, a fellow African comes and say, hey, I'm not Nigerian with my or claims to be a Nigerian, because I know that at the end of it is usually a multi-agency operation. You have all the agencies that are involved, including the Nigerian immigration, that can sort out who is who and so on and so forth. But
so for people who do not have the papers, what happens then?
Yeah, so for people that don't have papers, that's where the consulate is there. There are emergency travel documents. You can, not even in war situations or in situations like this, there are instances, personally, I've lost my passport in a foreign country. Thankfully, it didn't reach the stage, but the embassy was willing to give me an emergency travel document so that I can get back home. So I can imagine in situations like this, we have the missions, the staff of the Nigerian missions there, but that in Ukraine and Romania or Poland, and so they can issue them emergency travel documents.
There are some Nigerians that don't even know the road to the embassy in Ukraine. They don't even know, they don't even have any record with the embassy or anything like that.
So we're talking of when they get out of Ukraine. So if I'm sure at the border, they will have some documents to show. If you're trekking towards, so I don't know the situation on ground, but I would imagine in emergencies like this, there are exceptions. For example, if there is such emergency, people did not have time to pack their things, or their buildings have been blown up, and therefore their documents are there, and so on and so forth. So there could be some kind of screening at that entry point, where people are now screened and they're kept in certain places. Now, and there are assurances, or there are, the international system does not work in, it has some level of organization in such that when a situation happens and there are refugees coming from another country to others, obviously the first thing you'll not be asking is where are your papers? Yes, if you have papers, good, that's the best, that's a better thing. But if you don't, there are measures that will ensure that you still you can be received and you can be attended to. It's the humanity first before any other thing.
Now, I mean, shouldn't regional blocs such as the AU or, the ECOWAS take up something like this? I mean, shouldn't they be shouldn't they be seen to be championing this? Because I can imagine where if it was the vice versa, or if it were the reverse, in this sense, where there's chaos here, usually, Western countries will send in, their planes and the rest of them. And you are likely to see the EU itself, in fact, take up certain things like this. So why are we not seeing the AU and the ECOWAS, playing such roles?
They are in a way that is not as buoyant as what you will see EU and other, EU in particular doing, for example. Like if there is an evacuation or if something is happening, you find out that individual countries make provisions or plans. But EU also, as an organization, does that for all member countries. So we have to admit that that comes with a lot of capacity. Now, if the African Union, what the African Union could do, and I'm sure they're doing that, is to see how countries that, just like the scenario that we painted earlier on, if Nigeria is able to evacuate its citizens, it can as well evacuate, if it has the means, to evacuate other countries that do not have that capacity to do that, in spirit of brotherliness and Africanness.
All right, well, thank you so much. We'll have to end the discussion at this point. We appreciate your coming on the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Have you next time.
Yes.
Sure.